everybody. My name is Agni, and I'm back with another edition of the Breach Ready Dialogues. And I have Jon Collins from GigaOm with me today. As usual, I'll let the guest describe himself. Jon, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for having me on this. So yeah, Jon Collins, VP of Engagement at GigaOm, which is a very broad title, but ultimately it means connecting better with the enterprises and connecting with the vendors, because at GigaOm we're all about the win-win between the supply and demand. My background's, I used to work at GCHQ as a security engineer. Before that I was a programmer, and I've spent my time as a consultant on DevOps and Agile processes. So DevSecOps is my sweet spot, if you like. Very happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. I heard you talk about GCHQ. So my first introduction to that word was when I read a book by Simon Singh called it's about
the code something? Code wrinkle. Yeah, the code. That's the one.
And it tells you a story of how codes have evolved over time, and the whole great thing about Alan Turing and the history of GCHQ. So why don't we start with that experience? What was your experience there to the rest of the others who don't know about GCHQ? It's like the hallowed world of spies and mathematicians and the great things.
Essentially, there's nothing that hasn't been published that I'm not going to say. There's many negatives there. But it's a bunch of operations and technical engineers people. There's mathematicians and very smart people. There's analysts that then make sense of various communications going back and forth. And then there's the people that run it all. There's the admin side of it. And I was working in the engineering teams, helping the mathematicians support the analysts, if you like. Each one has its personality type. As very deep academic type mathematician people are a certain character. So that was fascinating. They still very much liked using text editors to program in Lisp, for example. I remember that. And then it was just at the time, this was the late 90s, and it was just at the time where networking was moving. IP existed already, but the backbone was still things like frame relay or switching, the old-fashioned switching networks and X25 connections and so on and so forth. That was fascinating to be involved in that kind of telecoms switch over. And then I did my time as a pen tester and was trying to break into systems. And pen testing sounds exciting, but it's very dull. It's very much about trying things and setting out tests and writing out the results and so on and so forth. And then you find something that kind of shouldn't be there and you go, oh, yay. But it's almost like being an archaeologist where there's hours and hours of dullness and then the occasional exciting find.
That sounds very much like security operations.
Yeah, exactly. It's 90% of the time is very dull. It's also, I understand, according to one of the Rolling Stones, a bit like being a rock star. You spend many hours of boredom with a few hours of excitement.
A rock star, yes. Did I just hear you compare security operations to being a rock star?
Yes, you literally did. And I think there's mileage in that because a lot of the work is about just knowing the routine, committing to patterns, being able to work in a team, etc. And then you get very short periods of fame. The difference with being a rock star is people like you. Nobody wants a security engineer to pop up and say that a big breach has happened.
Or a pen tester.
Exactly, yeah. No one wants the results because you're always the bearer of bad news, aren't you? The security department's the office of no.
Yes. And it should be renamed as that.
I don't know which I'd prefer less, to be honest, to be a security engineer or to be a help desk operative. Because help desk operatives are constantly getting a barrage of complaints and security engineers are telling people bad news all the time.
I think
you choose
what
that?
I meant was we should rename the security operations team as the office of no.
Oh, 100%, definitely. Yes, I don't think we'd be the first if we did, though. I think there's many teams that feel that way, even if they don't call themselves that.
Yeah. Let's come back to your current work. And so at GigaOm, tell us what you're doing now and how is that connected to breaches? What has been your experience in the past few months?
There's an interesting, so let me just say first So at GigaOm, we evaluate technologies largely. That's our bread and butter. We write radar reports, which closely map to if an organization's putting an RFP together, our research approach is we put a kind of RFP together, a set of requirements. Some are table stakes, some are differentiating, and then we've got functional and non-functional requirements, etc. And then we do a compare the market on those technologies. One of the issues that we have, and 40% of our work, we do over 100 reports a year, and 40% of them are, so it's going to be 40, isn't it, are security related. So we're pretty heavily invested in the security space. But the big challenges that people face with security generally boil down to complexity and change every time. There's always more attack surface that's being opened up. AI is the latest, greatest creator of new and very different attack surfaces. And it's all happening very fast. So as a security person, you're trying to keep up with that. And the tooling market it's not fantastic because it assumes stability. When you create a tool for anything, you assume that people are going to be using it for two to 5 years. Whereas there's so much change in the security space that a lot of the tools, even the ones that, and there's a whole wave, as you can imagine, of tools that we're seeing come out right now with how do we secure your MCP servers, how do we protect your prompts and so on. They will probably be out of date in a year's time. So how do you keep up with that as someone that's trying to make decisions around technology? It's a big challenge.
In today's world, everyone is becoming a Tom. Every security tool is a Tom trying to chase Jerry, which is the attacker. And no matter what Tom does, Jerry always slips past. Tom manages to catch Jerry, but then it's short-lived. Sooner or later, something else Jerry ends up doing, and Tom has let go of Jerry. On the other hand, there is this dog in the family, who actually sits on the refrigerator. And he knows that cheese is in the refrigerator, and Tom and Jerry needs to go to cheese, and he has a baseball bat with him. I think the name of the dog was Brutus, and then
That's correct.
Jerry on the head, a baseball bat every time he gets to the fridge. So I remember that, and we had a great laugh at it. We realized that's what's happening in the industry right now. As you said, everyone wants, this is the latest on what you can do with your MCP servers. This is what you need to do about this and that. But the fact is, AI or human, if there is no path to attack, there is not going to be an attack. AI can't create a path for itself to attack. Allow a path. So I think that's my approach to this whole new thing that's happening that's called AI. And I'm saying that I'm going to counter AI with no AI by saying that, yes, we have an MCP server, but you just can't reach it because it's not visible, because we have managed to redefine the attack surface in such a way it's just not visible.
So it's essentially hide the fridge. Is that right?
Hide the fridge. Yes. Brilliant. You got me there. That's what we're trying to do. So, because we are not people who are going to carry a baseball bat and hit Jerry on the head. We can't do that. Not any longer. Not to, but not any longer. So what we need to do also is that we not only need to hide the fridge, also need to make sure that the cheese, which is inside the fridge, is available to the hostess when she wants to come and have it. That's what we're focusing on. But what do you think of this approach?
I was just thinking through the history of security as you spoke, so bear with me as I work towards the answer. But a long time ago, risk avoidance was possible. And then, so literally just when everything was air-gapped, you could say, let's just build a wall around it and we'll be fine. That'll prevent anyone from coming in. And then our complexity grew, and so we had to move to risk management approaches. And we had defense in depth and all the things we have about authentication and authorization. That's with the start of identity management and so on. But then I remember the Jericho Forum in the 2000s, because the walls come tumbling down in the city of Jericho, saying that the boundary approach
It's
to
going away.
security was broken. It was more about permeability, which is your point about Tom and Jerry. There's always new ways to get to the fridge. Then cloud came along, which it essentially gave the attackers scale. They could suddenly, cloud and distributed computing, botnets and so on, gave these opportunities to attack any which way. So there just ended up being more and more Toms, or more and more Brutuses, whichever way you want to look at it. Or Jerrys. Hang on, no, it would be Jerrys.
Jerry.
So they just created a billion Jerrys.
They created more Jerrys and we created more Toms. And they
Yes,
created
exactly. And I think with the AI wave, so I talked about complexity and change at speed, but the speed has accelerated. So now we've fed the
And
Jerrys with
everybody else
kryptonite.
paid.
So the ability the number of new holes that's appearing, I'm very close to switching analogies and using the Swiss cheese problem of risk. So I'm not going to do that, but it's worth looking at. If your cheese is a Swiss cheese, you're stuck. But I think we absolutely need to look for alternate approaches to how we're trying to deal with the problem, because whilst we might have moved from risk avoidance to risk management to an extent, we're still using decades-old thinking. There's still a defense in depth, we'll be okay because we've got walls, etc. feeling about the thing. And there isn't time. Time is no longer on our side because of AI. New opportunities to break into systems. You can create 1,000 new social attacks in a minute and try all of them. You can A/B test all of them, get all the results in, and they can then use AI inside the company. So you can get me, because we're all susceptible, to type a prompt that then accesses a system I didn't even know I had access to, and leave the results accessible for someone on the outside, because all they're looking for is to get in so that then they can expand. And ultimately it's about the cheese, it's about the data. We need alternate approaches. So what you're describing, there you go, that was the long preamble. What you're describing is, how about we put an invisibility cloak over the whole thing? If I can switch from Tom and Jerry to Harry Potter.
Yeah.
From a risk management perspective, ultimately risk is probability times impact. So how much, is my question, does that reduce the probability of an attack? Or how much does that reduce the probability of which types of attack? And in terms of, certainly if you wanted my advice as a consultant, switching hats, and if I was speaking to an end user organization, the most obvious paths to your data from the outside can't afford to be left visible. So if there are alternate approaches to that, and I'm not here to back your horse, but if you propose one alternate approach to that, then it's certainly worth a look.
Yes, and I'm not saying that because of having one approach or the other. In fact, I think we're living in times where there is no single solution that can solve the problem, because every problem is context specific. Every organization, if there are two organizations who are in the same industry and the same kind of business, even their AI approaches are different. Their approach to risk management is different. Their approach to doing business is different. So they're not the same. When it comes to Harry Potter's invisibility cloak, you need to figure out how really you want to get it done. It has to be context specific. But then you raised 2 points now while you were talking, you were making the long preamble. Number one was creating walls. Ever since the attacks, what I saw in 2025 is that the attacks have moved on to edge devices. Attackers are trying to use the edge devices themselves to walk in. So be it any kind of an edge device, Fortinet was the most attacked, if I'm not wrong, when it comes to, and they had the most vulnerabilities as well. And then all those things that happened in between with Cisco's and everybody else. I'm not saying that they are insecure, but I'm saying that's opened up one more hole in the wall. These two developments have suddenly made it clear that the attack surface as we know it is not going to be the same forever. You talked about permeability. I think over time, as technologies evolve, with AI coming in, you talked about speed, scale of AI. I think AI will also be able to exploit and use permeability from different points of view, from different approaches, because they're not limited. Until a few years ago, nobody would have thought that exploitation of a help desk would shut down a car retailer for such a long time.
Exactly.
But it did. And I think, so all that I was saying is, what it boils down to is that I believe, and I think you might agree with that point of view, I think we need to shift the focus. I'm talking about end user organizations only. And again, as an evangelist, I think we need to shift the focus of investing in newer, fancier security tools to consolidating what we have and focusing on how can we build foundational capabilities that have the ability to customize, that can be customized to that specific context, and focus on these possibilities of denying anybody. You said hiding the fridge, right? And stuff like that. Can it be done foundationally? Can it be by design? Can it be resilience by design? Because as you talked a lot about risk management, but I think one of the essential elements of risk management today is how resilient are you? Can you really withstand an attack? I know many people don't talk about withstanding. I thought that was a great word.
There's a lot to unpack there, and the first thing and the last thing I want to talk about is responsibility in the context of architecture. And I think if there's one piece of advice I'd like to leave people on, I know we're not finished, but it's about taking responsibility for your entire architecture of both infrastructure and security tools, and seeing them at the level above just tools or just services or whatever. And that's leaving gaping holes in the attack surface that we're thinking too low a level. And we've talked about this before, an issue we have in the security industry is the way that products are marketed. So if you're a startup in the security space, you're thinking, how can I create a differentiated solution? How can I create a new category for that differentiated solution? And you rush into the market with an entirely new way of solving a bunch of security problems that overlaps heavily with others. But the problem with doing that is you're then creating more complexity in your own space. And I think that the way that we deploy security, the way we procure security and deploy security tools today is actually adding to the attack surface. And ops tools, as you say, help desk tools and so on. We're creating process level vulnerabilities. We're slowing down our ability to react. We're giving ourselves events information in more than one source. We're making it hard to get an integrated view of identity. And we do, the cautionary moment is Palo Alto, for example, when it said, no, we're pulling everything into the same platform. And this was last year, and for a while its share price plummeted because Palo Alto's investors didn't like that they had less products to sell. But actually they did absolutely the right thing to reduce the complexity of their own solution set. So that's the dilemma that's happening on the vendor side. And therefore it's even more important for end user organizations to recognize that if you've got 50 plus tools, that's actually part of your problem from a security perspective.
Yeah. And I think what you just talked about is a dilemma. Do we create new areas, or do we think about cognitive bias, where the whole world is going in one direction? As you said, Palo Alto was a big example of that. Because everyone had a cognitive bias that they're doing wrong, so their share price plummeted. True, but then I think you're right. I don't know how we're doing on time, but I think we spoke a lot. And if you're okay with it, I can ask you one more question and we can answer there. And that question was more to do with breach readiness. Says the preventive model as the earlier world was. How effective do you think, how important do you think it is to think about what part of your business can remain unaffected by your breach versus thinking of business continuity? Because I think those are two different words. Affected means the attack is not going to reach there even if it manages to breach a few. But business continuity is about the part that's got affected. So what are your views about that? How do you feel that to be a problem?
Fair to say my views are pretty strong on this, that it's a human trait to start to feel that one's area of the business is the most important. So if you're in marketing, you think about marketing a lot. If you're in sales, you think about sales a lot. If you're in security, you think about security a lot, and that's great. But if you're doing that to the detriment of thinking about the organization that you're serving, then you've got a problem. There's two things, and I'm thinking of one of the recent major breaches in the UK was exacerbated by a lack of ability to recover, because the documentation wasn't there, because the tooling had been deployed by new people, and the people that had deployed the original stuff weren't around to ask. That the recoverability from the attack became a huge aspect of what was going on. So it's inexcusable to me for security as a whole not to understand the higher priorities of the business. How does the business actually make money? And how does the business actually manage its reputation? Those sorts of questions. And then map that onto the systems that are being supported. And then secondly, how to actually minimize the time between a breach occurring. Because breaches will occur. We can reduce the chances of that, but we can't reduce it to zero. So how do we go for it? And this is, to me, breach readiness is actually at the moment of a breach to know what to focus on, to know what steps to apply to bring the core parts of the business back into position as fast as possible. And as you say, it's good old business continuity planning applied to security.
Sorry, I interrupted you. What I was saying is, the proposition that I'm making is slightly different. I'm saying that business continuity is for the business that got disrupted. But what if we design enterprises in a way, thoughtfully, through design, by consulting, making it context specific, so that businesses should there be a cyber attack, that attack remains where the attack originated, which means other parts of the business remain unaffected. And I'm stressing on the word unaffected because that's contrarian to the business continuity view, which is to continue after disruption. I'm saying that if we are able to design enterprises in such a way that when the attack happens, large parts of the organization remain unaffected, which in turn means you are now thinking of business during cyber attacks to be 80% of the total versus business during cyber attacks to be 15 to 20% of the total by invoking a business continuity plan. That's where I'm headed. That's what I am thinking about.
Yeah. And that's what you're essentially saying is don't design a business like the Titanic. So when you get a gash along the side, all parts of it wasn't possible for it not to sink. And so to be able to manage the blast radius of an attack is it should be a fundamental part of the strategy. But the strategy, so where we agree, I think, is that at the moment organizations, and I think back to the IBM AI model, but I use this in every way. So moving from reactive to active to proactive, and the AI model adds predictive, which is lovely. But if you're in reactive, you can't get straight to the highest level of maturity without going through an active stage. So the first stage to me is to identify the critical parts of the business.
Exactly.
Then it's to build the risk-based protections around those. And to your point, a very good risk-based protection is to minimize if one of those gets taken out, the other ones don't. That's a perfectly valid path.
Oh, thank you. You agree with me finally. I was talking to another person and he said, and this is practically what he told me. The press notice that goes out today is we had an unprecedented cyber attack. In order to protect the interests of our stakeholders, we're going to shut down. From here, if that press note moves to we had an unprecedented cyber attack, and despite that, we continue to serve our customers and our stakeholders. We've hired security specialists to look at the nature of the attack, but we are working for you. That changes the whole dimension.
Yeah, if it was a retailer, for example, you could say, we've had this unprecedented cyber attack and we're unable to give you credit right now, but you can still buy things. And it's just literally limiting. I'm a huge advocate of service-based architectures, whether you from any form. So if one part of the service goes away, then you should have loosely coupled services rather than tightly coupled services, so that the other services don't get dragged down by the loss of one. It should. So luckily, what I said in the middle of this was, it's about responsibility for your architecture. It's about making the right architectural choices and actually building in a resilient architectural design, not at the business level, but at an application and service level to serve those bits of the business. I think we thoroughly agree on your notion there.
Thank you so much for finally agreeing with me. And I think I enjoyed talking to you. I hope you did too. And there are a lot of nuggets that you've given, which I'm going to take over to my next breach ready dialogues that I'm going to have with anyone else. And until now, I have had industry experts, I've had researchers. You are the latest to join the breach ready dialogue. So thank you so much, Jon. It was lovely chatting with you.